What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today what I wanted to do is a little bit of a side-by-side comparison of the Black Ops Cold War Alpha compared to Modern Warfare in its current state. And the reason I wanted to do this is one of the biggest complaints in the community after seeing the multiplayer reveal for Cold War is a lot of people are saying the graphics and animations just don't keep up with Modern Warfare and it feels like a step back in those areas. And this is something that I actually agree with. This was one of my biggest gripes with the Cold War Alpha, is it felt like a step back from Modern Warfare. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think Cold War is a bad-looking Call of Duty game. I think it is a step up from Treyarch's previous title, Black Ops 4, and some of the claims I've seen in the community are also ridiculous. There's some people that are saying that Call of Duty Mobile literally looks better and has better graphics than this, and that's just a massive over-exaggeration. But at the end of the day, like I said, it does feel like a step back from Modern Warfare because in Modern Warfare, they really push those areas to the next level. The graphics and the animations and all of the attention to detail with the weapons and how they handle, that was a huge leap forward for the Call of Duty franchise. And as a result, going into Cold War, it feels like a step back from there. So the purpose of today's video is to break this down a little bit more and actually look at some side-by-side comparisons and look at similar situations with somewhat similar lighting to see how they look in comparison and what kind of difference there is between the Black Ops Cold War Alpha and Modern Warfare. Now, of course, I do have to be very clear, this isn't exactly a fair comparison because we're looking at an alpha build of a game versus a full build of the game that's been out for a long time and optimized over time. And when I went back and I looked at some gameplay that I captured at the capture event for Modern Warfare before the alpha, it was noticeably worse than it is now. So I do expect to see some improvements with Cold War. No massive overhauls by any means. I still don't think it's going to reach the level of Modern Warfare when it comes to animations or anything. But I do anticipate they'll clean a few things up and it will look a bit nicer in the full build compared to the alpha build. So let's start off with some still images from the gameplay. I tried to select situations in both games that were really similar in the lighting situation and the colors and stuff to the best of my ability. But first up, we have a still image of Moscow here, looking toward the sun a little bit, and we can see some of the puddles on the ground. We've got some nice reflections and stuff in there. It's not a super sharp and clear image, especially if you look at the gun model, although I was moving at the time, so that might have affected that a little bit. But overall, I would say this isn't bad looking at all. This actually looks quite good for a Call of Duty game. Pre-Modern Warfare, at least. Now let's have a look at Modern Warfare, and this is the most similar map with the most similar type of lighting situation that I could think of, at least. And I tried to get a similar situation where, again, you can see a puddle with a bit of a reflection and everything. And overall, immediately I noticed it is a much sharper image. And that's really the main thing that I noticed. Aside from that sharpness in the image, I would say graphically they're not all that different from a still image. This isn't taking animations into account, which we're going to look at in a little bit. But so far, looking at this first image, I don't think Cold War looks bad by any means. I think it looks perfectly fine for a Call of Duty game. Next up, let's take a look at Miami. And here I was actually able to stand still for this particular image. So it's actually noticeably clearer, although it's still not quite as sharp as Modern Warfare tends to be on the gun model. But aside from that, I think this looks awesome. You see the nice reflection in the puddle there. That really stands out. There's lots of colors and everything. And personally, I think this looks awesome. Let's compare that side by side on Piccadilly. That's the most similar looking map that I could find in Modern Warfare. And once again, even though that image on Miami looks great, I still think Modern Warfare looks a little bit better. It looks a bit more polished, a lot sharper of an image. Also, there's a lot more contrast with the gun compared to the background. Now, that might have something to do with the exact lighting situation in that exact moment. But in general, it seems like the Modern Warfare guns, they don't blend in with the background as much as in Cold War. They pop a bit more. It's like they just attract a bit more light than in Cold War. So this is just another situation where I don't think Cold War looks bad. I think it looks just fine. But when you do put it side by side with Modern Warfare, I think it's pretty clear that Modern Warfare is looking better. But now I want to take a bit of a deeper look at the weapon models, and it turns out there are actually a few guns that are used in both of these games, so we can actually have a bit of an apples-to-apples comparison here. And let's start it off with the MP5. Now again, the lighting situations weren't quite perfect. Hackney Yard isn't quite as overcast, like there's a bit more sunlight coming through, so you're going to get a bit more sun on the gun, for instance. But I tried to keep the sun in a similar position and everything. And you can see the side-by-side here. And in this situation, if we're just looking at the gun model and the hand and everything, I actually think it's much closer here. I think they both look great. I would say they're both pretty much equal as far as how good they look. It just feels like there's a bit more lighting in Modern Warfare here just due to the situation. And perhaps the gun in Modern Warfare, it's like it has a slightly different coating that's a bit more reflective, whereas the MP5 in Cold War has a bit more of a textured finish that doesn't reflect light as much. For just looking at graphical fidelity here though, I personally don't think there's a clear winner. But let's take that a step further and look at the animation difference here. And I'm just firing a magazine off while hip firing because that's what I did in the Cold War Alpha. And then you can see the reload animation at the end. Couple things to point out. While firing, there seems to be a lot less muzzle flash in Cold War compared to Modern Warfare. And the muzzle flash itself has way more detail in Modern Warfare. It looks way, way better. It actually looks really bad in Cold War, in my opinion. I hope that's just an aspect that's unfinished and they're going to rework that a little bit. Because that muzzle flash in Cold War, it just looks like a slight glow rather than actual flames coming out of the barrel. As for the reload animation, they're actually very similar. They're almost copy and paste, it looks like, although slightly different perspective and everything. But if we're just judging the reload animation here on the MP5 at least, I think they're both pretty much equal. I'm not really seeing any big difference here in the animation that makes one way better than the other. But moving on, I want to have a look at another gun here, so it's not just the MP5. And on the left in Modern Warfare, we've got the M4, and then on the right, we have the XM4, which is the Colt Commando, which was kind of the predecessor to the M4, so they're very similar guns, even though they're not identical. And again, while firing, there is such a big difference when it comes to muzzle flash. Once again, in Modern Warfare, you see actual flames coming out of the barrel, whereas in Cold War, it's like a glow effect that they added on top, and it looks really bad. So there's just no contest here. And muzzle flash might seem so minor because it just happens like in a couple frames. It's so fast that you would think that you don't even pick up on that stuff. But that's the thing about Modern Warfare is they've paid so much attention to all the little details that you don't even necessarily consciously register. But when you put them all together, they really add up to a great looking and feeling experience, to the point where when you do go to a game like Cold War, which doesn't have that same sort of attention to detail, you notice this stuff right away, even if you can't consciously put your finger on what's different. Because if we look at these two weapon models side by side, just the models themselves, once again, I don't think either really looks significantly better than the other. It's a slightly different art style, slightly different lighting situation as well, even though I tried to get them somewhat similar. So yeah, I think a lot of this feeling of Modern Warfare feeling like it looks way better than Cold War just comes down to those little tiny details that Modern Warfare really nailed. As for the reload animation here, again, I think they both look great. I actually really like the Commando reload animation where you flip the mag out to the right. I think that looks kind of cool and flashy. And if we're just talking about the looks of the animation, like the aesthetics of the animations, I think they're roughly equal. Now, having said this though, I did make a video last week showing off all of the different reload animations for every gun we had access to in the alpha, and there were actually some realism issues with a lot of those reloads where it just didn't make any sense, where like you were chambering around when there was already a round chambered, or you weren't chambering around when you should have been, and it just didn't make sense from like a logical standpoint for anybody that knows how those guns work. So that's another area where Modern Warfare just paid a lot more attention to those details. But when it comes to something like that, that really only applies to the people that know their guns. For the average Call of Duty player out there, they would never notice anything like that. But finally here, I wanted to show yet another side-by-side here of Modern Warfare versus Cold War. I tried to use a somewhat similar setup here in Modern Warfare, just playing against bots on a nice bright map with a really nice blue sky. It's about the closest map that we would get in Modern Warfare to satellite. And what I'm really noticing here is Modern Warfare is just a lot more on the sharp side. It seems like things are a lot softer in Cold War, a little bit blurry in some areas, even though I turned off motion blur before this game. But honestly, with some optimization and fine-tuning, I think most of this could potentially be worked out with Cold War, at least when it comes to how sharp the image looks and how much the gun sort of blends in with the background. But yeah, I think that's a good place to leave this. As far as the graphical comparison goes, I definitely still think Modern Warfare is clearly the better looking game overall, and a lot of that just comes down to the attention to detail, but also the sharpness of the image. Now, another big part of this is audio as well, and that's something I'm not really going to get into too much detail in this video because it's a totally different topic. But it does also contribute pretty strongly to the feel of immersion in the situation, so I do want to touch on it briefly here. And the difference in gun audio is just night and day. Like, Modern Warfare is super bassy, super loud as well compared to all of the other sounds in the environment, which makes sense from a realism standpoint. Whereas in Cold War, the guns don't have that sort of bass. It doesn't feel like you're shooting a real gun so much just based on the sound. It's much more of an arcadey style, which for gameplay purposes, I think actually works better because you can get a better balance of footstep audio to gunfire audio, which gives you better feedback. And for the gameplay, I think that plays better for an arcade style shooter that Call of Duty is. But at the same time, it does pull a lot of that immersion out of the picture. So here's to hoping that they do manage to optimize and make some pretty big improvements to the animations and just overall the graphical fidelity as we get into the beta and the full build of the game. I realize there's not that much time to like overhaul anything, but I think they can optimize and just tweak things and make some improvements. Of course, we will just have to wait and see, and I would like to know in the comment section below, what did you guys think about the results in this video? Were you surprised to see just how different these two were or how similar they were in their looks? And also, which one do you think looks better? Do you agree with me? Do you think in general Modern Warfare does look better than Cold War? Or do you maybe think it's the other way around? Just let me know those thoughts down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated. And don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.